Sorry, trying to make sure I've got all this set up for the. Okay, so tonight we're going to look at 1 Samuel, and remember that the idea here is, and when we look at the Old Testament, we will see that there are some divisions that the church has kind of built in. And the first one is the law, and that's Genesis through Deuteronomy. Then we have the books of history, which is Joshua. They are out there, aren't they?
Yeah, that was just the teacher in me.
I know. Then Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah are the books of history. Okay, and of course the purpose there is that they are telling the Israeli history outside of the first 5 books. Okay. Then the next section is the books of poetry, which is Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Okay. And then after that are the major prophets. Okay. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then the minor prophets, which is everything else to the end of the. Okay. That's kind of how they divide them. So 1st and 2nd Samuel are the 4th and the 5th book of the 12 books of history. Okay. Now, what we're looking at as we look at 1 Samuel is we are looking at the beginning of the king of the monarchy in Israel. Okay. So it begins by talking about Samuel. Okay. It is anonymously written. However, most experts believe that it's probably a compilation of Samuel, Nathan, and Gad, which Samuel is the kingmaker. He's the last judge. Nathan and Gad are the 2 prophets during David's reign. Okay. If you ever look in David's reign, Nathan and Gad will be the 2 prophets that you see. Okay. As far as date, the events recorded end in about 960 BC, which means that the dating is probably somewhere between, of the writing is somewhere between 960 and about 931 BC, which would have been when Solomon died. So probably it is the writing is finished somewhere before the death of Solomon. The audience, of course, is the nation of Israel. If you really watch carefully, as we get into Kings, you will see this brought up. And if you want to look at the rest of his acts, look at these books of the, there are a lot of books written about their monarchs. And so this is probably some compilation of that, talking specifically about Samuel and then Saul and then David. Okay. Although it does not, as far as the kings of it, 1 Samuel is written during the judgeship of Samuel and the reign of Saul. Okay, 2 Samuel begins the reign of David. The key verse, certainly of 1 Samuel, is this, and it says, it's 1 Samuel 13 and 14, and it says, "And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." 1 Samuel 13, verses 13 and 14 was that passage. So let's really quickly deal with this. 1 Samuel really split into 2 sections. Chapters 1 through 12 talk about Samuel and his judgeship over Israel. And then beginning in chapter 13, we have the rise of Saul and the rise of David. Okay. Although he does not actually become king until 2 Samuel. Okay, so let's look at some of the high points here. The first one is that we begin with the birth of Samuel, and his birth is somewhat miraculous. That's the best way to explain it. So we have Elkanah, and Elkanah had two wives. He had Hannah and he had Peninnah, were his two wives. Okay. Peninnah had children. Hannah did not have children. And Peninnah would mistreat Hannah because she didn't have any kids. So we have this situation where every year Peninnah would take his two wives and take them into Jerusalem to worship at the not to Jerusalem, would take them to Shiloh to worship at the tabernacle. And one year, Hannah goes in and she's just outside the tabernacle. She would not have been allowed to go in because she was a woman. But she is praying to God and fervently praying that God would give her a kid. Eli, who is the priest at the time, thinks she's drunk and goes to admonish her. And she goes, "No, I'm not drunk. I'm praying fervently." And he goes, "Well, may your prayer be answered." And the Lord heard her. And by the way, she makes a promise. She goes, "If you'll give me a child, then I'll give him back to you." First of all, and interestingly enough, it says that one of the deals is that he, part of her petition is, "I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head." So what she has done in a way is she has promised God to do for Samuel what God told Samson's mom to do. Notice, "I will give him back to the Lord and he will." And so the idea here is something at least similar to, "And I will give him to the Lord as a Nazirite his entire life." But the idea is, "I will return him to the Lord." So Eli thinks she's drunk and says, "Well, may the Lord find favor." So, okay. So they go home. God remembers. She has a baby. She comes back to the tabernacle later and gives him, once he's weaned, once he's old enough to, for her to let him move into the tabernacle or move into the place of worship, then she follows through on her vow to the Lord. Every year she comes and brings him a change of clothes and visits with him, but she gives him to the Lord. And it tells us that the Lord remembered her again because she was faithful and gave her more children. Okay, so we see this kind of miraculous move here.
Where are you?
The end of chapter 1 of 1 Samuel. Okay, so as we go forward, what we find out next is that Eli, who was the priest who had met with Hannah, his children are worthless. Okay, they are greedy for gain. They are cheating people. They're misusing the tabernacle. Okay, and so God is angry with them. And eventually, however this ends up working, eventually we have God call out to Samuel. This is chapter 3. We have the call of Samuel, and what we have, he's laying in bed, and someone goes, "Samuel," and he gets up and goes to Eli and goes, "Yes, you asked for me." "No, I didn't ask for you. Go back to bed." Okay, so he goes back to bed. "Samuel." He gets up, goes to Eli again. "You called me." "No, I didn't call." Well, finally, Eli recognizes that it's God calling. And he tells him, "You stay in bed. The next time you hear that, you say, what would you want from me, Lord?" Well, then the Lord tells him, "I've rejected Eli and his house, and I'm going to kill them all." So really good first message. So Eli comes to him in the morning and says, "So what did God tell you?" And he didn't want to say, and he goes, "No, you better tell me." So he told him, "Your entire family is going to die because you've been unfaithful to God." This comes to pass in the next chapter when we have what is the first time you see this. Israel goes out into battle against the Philistines, and they get thromped. So they say, "I know, we'll take the ark." Okay, so now here's the idea, and this is very important. God didn't tell them to take the ark. they decided, well, if we have the ark, God is required to help us. So they take the ark. The Philistines see the ark and get really scared and go, if we don't fight even harder, we're going to get taken because of the ark. So they whoop them even worse and take the ark. And both of Eli's children die in the battle. A runner comes back to tell Eli. Eli said, we lost the battle. Your sons are both dead. And he goes, and what about the ark? He goes, the ark was taken. And Eli falls back in his chair, hits his head, and dies, thus fulfilling the prophecy. So there's an important element to this that I want to make sure we get into, is that we have at the very end of chapter 4, we have this little statement that Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, okay, so the wife of one of the sons who was killed, was pregnant and about to give birth. And right before she gives birth, she finds out that her husband's dead, her father-in-law's dead, or her brother-in-law's dead. And in agony over that, she goes into labor. She has the child, and she names the child Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from Israel. Okay, so we have this moment at the end of chapter 4 that feels like God has been defeated. Okay, but then chapter 5 breaks that, because we have the Philistines capture the ark and they bring it to Ashdod, into their hometown. They take it and they put it in the house of their god, Dagon. And they go to bed that night. When they come back in the next morning, Dagon is lying prostrate in front of the ark. The statue of Dagon has fallen on its face in front of the ark. And they go, wow, that's a little weird. So they pick the statue back up, set it back up, get ready, and then they go through their day. And that night they go back to bed, and the next morning they walk in, and Dagon's laying on his face again, only this time his head has fallen off and his hands have fallen off. And his head is laying in the doorway, which then Samuel makes sure to mention, which is the reason that when the Philistines go into the temple of Dagon, they don't step on the threshold, because that's where their god's head was laying. About that time, a huge plague starts sweeping the Philistines. Now, it doesn't tell us exactly, but clearly some of the issue is, or some level of boils or hemorrhoids or something. But in addition to the pain and discomfort of it, it made all the men sterile. And so they go, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I think God is judging us. And they go, well, but let's make sure. And so what they do is they come up with this really cool plan that they take a mother ox who's never pulled a plow, okay, and has just had babies, is still nursing. Put the babies in a pen, hook the ark up, put the ark on a cart, hook the cart up to the oxen, and say, okay, here's how we're going to do this. If God is doing this to us, then the mother ox will go to Israel. If it's just a happenstance that just happened to happen at this time, then mama ox is going to go back to the babies who are crying. So they let the ox go and straight to Israel. Okay, in addition to that, they build, and this is so much fun, 5 golden rats and 5 golden images of the boils or hemorrhoids or whatever it is. They take and they make a golden image of these sores they're having and set it in the cart as a appeasement to the God of Israel for taking the ark. By the way, it says later that they are put inside the ark. So we have we have the jar of manna, we have the 10 commandments, we have Aaron's staff that budded and produced almonds, and we have these 5 golden rats and 5 golden tumors, okay, or hemorrhoids or whatever they are.
Where is that at?
Yeah, it should be 5. So the hands of the Lord was heavy against the people, Hold on.
But mine says they put it in a chest,
And put it with it.
but not in the ark.
Right. But there is, and I don't remember where, but I remember hearing somewhere that they eventually put them in the ark. That may not be true. But anyway, no matter how this works, so put it in a chest.
Thank you.
And they put put the ark of the Lord on a cart and the box with the golden mice and the images of their tumors. Okay. So they go back, they returns to Israel, the first town in Israel, do something even the Philistines weren't stupid enough to do. They get there and the people of this first town go, oh, we need to make sure they didn't take anything out of the ark. And so they opened the Ark of the Covenant. And God wiped the entire town out. Let me find the number. It's the end of 6. All fortified city. No, not the whole village, but killed 70 of them because they looked in the ark. So a group of 70 men thought, we got to check and make sure everything's in there. They opened it and God goes, no, that wasn't a good idea. So we go on and then we continue this movement that the ark is back in Israel, but it is far from the tabernacle. And there's almost this mourning of the people over it. Okay. So then as we move into 7, we see that Samuel was a good judge. He brings them their first real victory over the Philistines. They love him. They think the world of him. Chapter 7 also has the discussion of the Ebenezer stone. If you've ever heard that, some of the hymns, it says, here I raise my Ebenezer. So it's a stone. It's a stone of help. And so he holds up this rock as a symbol and he says, up until now, the Lord has helped us. So when you see this rock, remember that God helped. So that's an Ebenezer. Okay. Then in chapter 8, we have a moment. Samuel's now old and his sons have become judges over Israel. And they are not very good either. They are not up to his standard. They are greedy. They are taking bribes. They are doing things they should not have done. And Israel, in response to that, goes, we don't like your kids as judges, so we want a king. Now, here is the thing that we need to understand, because this is a very important thing. In verse 4, it says, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. Okay, so let me make sure we understand. The sin in this is not them asking for a king. The sin is them asking for a king like all the other nations have. Okay, now let's dig into that. Who was supposed to be their king? God. Okay. Now, so should they have wanted a king like all the other nations had? No. By the way, Deuteronomy 17 says, when you ask for a king, here's what your king ought to do. Okay. But it's clear that this was not what God wanted for them, because he was their king. So Samuel is upset and he says, I can't believe they're doing this. And God goes, no, they're not rejecting you, Samuel. They're rejecting me. So I need you to make sure to tell them exactly what's going to happen if they have a king. And so the rest of chapter 8 goes into this discussion, and Samuel tells them, hey, if you have a king, here's what he's going to do. He's going to take your sons to serve in his army. He's going to take your land for himself. He's going to do all these things. He's going to make you pay a tithe to him and all this sort of stuff that you really don't want. He's going to take the best of all you have. And then you're going to cry out because he's mistreating you, and I'm not going to listen because this is what you asked for. But they refused to listen and said, nope, we want a king. Like all the other nations. See? No, but there shall be a king over us, that we may be like all the nations. That's verse 19, the second half. And that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Okay? We don't want God to do that. We want a guy that we can see. Okay, we'll give you a king. So chapter 9, and then 10, all the way up to chapter 12 is Samuel anointing Saul, a little bit of a look at Saul's character to begin. Saul doesn't think he's good enough. And then in some ways you think, oh, good, humility, but we find out later that's not what it was. Okay, it wasn't humility, it was insecurity. There's a difference. And we go forward. Then at the end of chapter 12, Samuel says, okay, I'm done being your judge. You have a king now. And he says, you shouldn't have asked for a king, but you did. So here's what I'm going to tell you. If your king will listen to the Lord, if you will listen to the Lord, then it will end up well for you. But if you fall astray, then your king is going to become a really bad decision. So we go forward. Okay. We have about 2 chapters of Saul's kingship, and not a one of them is good. If you look at Saul's kingship, it is awful from the very beginning. Okay, so let's look at why for a minute. So first of all, Saul goes out. He's been king, and he's reigned 2 years. He's reigned a couple years, and the Philistines come to fight, and he goes out against them. And Samuel tells him clearly, this is the idea. Samuel had told him, I will be there in 7 days to offer sacrifices for you and to seek the Lord's blessing before you go into battle. As each day goes, the people get a little more concerned because Samuel hasn't shown up. And before Samuel was actually before the time limit for Samuel to show up, Saul decides, oh my gosh, I've got to fix this. So he goes ahead and offers the sacrifices, which he should not have done because he's not a priest. No sooner does he finish, Samuel shows up. And we see Saul go, oh, I was concerned about this and I was concerned about that. So it's clear that Saul is more concerned about the people than he is about following God. That is always the situation. He is more concerned about his peers than he is about following God. Okay, we see the same thing moving further. We see the next set of battle. Chapter 14 is one of the most interesting parts of this whole story, because here's what I'm going to tell you. Saul was a terrible king. Jonathan would have been an incredible king. When you look at chapter 14, we see a contrast in the life of Jonathan and the life of Saul. Saul is indecisive. Jonathan wants to follow what God says and seek God to work. Saul makes rash oaths that he shouldn't have made. And Jonathan, in chapter 14, Jonathan nearly dies because Saul made a rash oath. Okay. Jonathan started a huge victory for the children of Israel. Saul decides to join it, and he says, nobody gets to eat until I've had vengeance. And people escape because everybody's famished and hungry. Jonathan didn't know anything about it. He had a little bit of honey, and it made him better. And then we have this moment where Saul finds out, and he's about to kill Jonathan. But the children of Israel go, no, don't kill him. He won the battle. But then we also see him cause the children of Israel to sin because whenever they finally get done with the battle and he offers them the food, they are not properly preparing it because they're so hungry. In fact, they're breaking the most central law in all of the Jewish law. You don't eat meat with the blood. You drain the blood before you eat the meat. And they're not doing that because they're starving. Imagine running after an enemy for all day with no food. Okay. So then we come to chapter 15. And we come to the end of, we have the Amalekites. Okay. The Amalekites are kind of the sworn enemy of Israel. Now, what happened is when they were coming through and during their wanderings, the Amalekites ambushed them. And God said, I hate them. I'm going to destroy them completely. So he tells Saul, you go wipe them all out. And Saul fails to do that. Okay. What he does, and this is a biblical term we need to understand, he puts the Amalekites under the ban. Okay. It's the same thing that happened with Jericho. Remember, kill everyone. Don't take any spoils. Don't take any livestock. You kill everything that breathes. And it's all mine. They are to be wiped out. And Saul leaves the king alive, takes a bunch of the animals, the best of the animals and all of that. God says, I am really angry to Samuel. And Samuel goes to meet him and he says, so, did you win? Did you beat this battle? He goes, oh yeah, I did exactly what the Lord said. Then why do I hear cows and why do I hear cows and sheep? Well, I kept the best to sacrifice to the Lord. Let me just be completely fair. That is not what he did. He got caught and said, oh, I'm sacrificing it to the Lord. And Samuel responds with, so let me ask you a question, Saul. Which do you think God wants more, your obedience or your sacrifice? And at this point comes this moment that God says, I have rejected you as king. I am going to put a new king that is my king, that is the man after my heart. It's the guy I've chosen. So now here's the contrast again. Saul is a king like all the other nations. David is God's king. Okay. So Saul is rejected. And then the very next chapter, we have David anointed as king. Now, the interesting thing is David is anointed here, but he doesn't become king for a long period of time. If we're guessing that David is 15 or 16 when he fights Goliath, then 25 years, David's 40 when he becomes king. So there is a large section between David being anointed king and David actually becoming king. But from chapter 16 on, Saul is going downhill and David is rising. Okay. Now, one of the primary reasons is that when the Holy, and this is how it's phrased, the Spirit of the Lord, the anointing Spirit, so the Spirit of the Lord was on Saul as king. It leaves and goes to David. And in its place comes a demon, an evil spirit, to torment him.
What verse is that?
I'm going to have to look. Hold on.
16:14.
Thank you. Right. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord came to torment him. Okay. And it would throw him into crazy moments. And they said, well, maybe music will help. So they get David to come and play. Now, here's the fun part of this, and it's important that we understand this. What's really going on? He's in the presence of the Holy Spirit again.
It's a spiritual battle.
It's a battle. Now, several times, though, within the context of the story, as we go further, Saul tries to kill David in these moments.
Satan's plan.
Okay. But we go forward and we see this moment that, okay, so David would come and go and would come and calm Saul down when he was really going crazy. Chapter 17 is the story of David and Goliath. I bring this up. This is something that I think is probably the most important takeaway of this story, is that while everyone else in the Israeli army is focused on Goliath, David is focused on God. This is the critical element. Everyone else is freaked out by Goliath, and David treats Goliath like an afterthought. Never uses his name, never really even says anything. You are just this Philistine who's been blaspheming my God. You're going to die. Okay. I do want to, however, mention that we often treat this like it is. We add to the fun of the David being the underdog by not understanding what a sling can do. When we think of sling, we think of, and I thought it was funny in the book, that's even the picture they show as a slingshot, which I'm not saying a slingshot is not a decent weapon, but that's not what a sling is. A sling is about a 3-foot long cord, double cord, with a leather pouch, and you took a rock as big as my fist, stuck it in there, and threw it at 150 miles an hour. So it would be like, well, be beyond Randy Johnson throwing a rock at you. And he hit him in the head. By the way, they talk about in some other places that there were some people of the tribe of Benjamin who could hit a bird in the eye from 100 yards. It was incredibly accurate. It was incredibly powerful. It was not that David's weapon was underutilized. It's the idea that you have this soldier and you have a kid who watched sheep and God gave him the victory. So understand. But this leads to a major issue in the story. David kills Goliath, and over the next little bit, we have this moment that is kind of summed up in chapter 18, verse 7. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. So they are ascribing to David more work than Saul. Now, what does Saul immediately think? They want him as king instead of me. Now, remember when I said at the beginning that at the beginning of Saul's, time as he's being anointed, he's freaking out and hiding and all this sort of stuff. And you think, oh, humility. No. He's insecure. Well, Saul's insecurity's coming back. Oh, they don't want me as king. They want, I gotta eliminate this guy who's a threat to my rule. Okay. But God, and we see it at the beginning of 18, has done something very powerful. Saul, his main worry is, well, after I'm king, they'll make David king, and then, maybe he will even kill me, and then my son won't become king after me. But David and Jonathan have become the best of friends. In fact, the fun part of this is every member of Saul's family except Saul, or every major member of Saul's family except Saul, loved David. Saul's daughter's in love with David. Saul's son thinks David's his best bud. Okay? But Saul is jealous. So this harmful spirit comes and he's going crazy in the house. David shows up to play and Saul tries to pin him to the wall with a spear. Tries to kill him. Okay? And we go forward. Saul finds out that his youngest daughter, who's apparently really, really pretty, loves David. And so he goes, oh, here's a chance for me to kill him. Go out and kill 100 Philistines. And what's the idea? You go out to battle, they'll kill him. It won't be my fault. Nobody can trace it to me. People die in battle all the time. David brings back double the order, which, by the way, it's a gross order. He asked for 100 Philistine foreskins. So not something a Philistine's going to give him without them being dead. David brings him 200. So he marries his daughter. Saul tries to kill him again in chapter 19. Okay. And we finally come to the point where Jonathan realizes what's going on. And he stands up for David and helps David escape. By the way, before this is all over, Saul tries to kill his son for being on David's side. So notice the very important idea here. God is working through David. He is helping David, but Saul is turning into a raving maniac because he no longer has the presence of God. So as we move forward, we find chapter 20 will mention this because this is something that Jesus brings up later. Okay. So chapter 21 is when David is fleeing from Saul and he comes to the tabernacle and he finds the high priest and he says, David's trembling. He says to him, the king has charged me in a matter and said to me, let no one know anything about the matter about which I send you on, and with which I've charged you. I've made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. So he lies to the high priest. Let's just be fair as to what goes on. He tells him a story. And he says, but I need food. The priest goes, so here's my question. So he goes, I don't have anything except for, remember, this is how this works. Every day, high priests would bake bread, unleavened bread, and they would lay it out on this table in the tabernacle. And they would take the day-old bread off, and then that they could eat. But only the priest could eat it. They couldn't give it to anyone but priests. That was the kind of the rule. But Ahimelech goes ahead and gives him this bread. Okay, he says, now let me make sure, though, that the one thing I would tell you is you can't have been with your wife. You have to be clean. And he goes, oh, yes, I am. We don't know whether he was or not. He says, yeah, I'm good. And then he says, also, do you happen to have a sword? And he goes, well, the only sword I have is Goliath's sword. So when David had killed Goliath, he had given the sword to the tabernacle, and it had stayed in the tabernacle as a spoil of war. So now he comes and gets it back. Okay. David flees and actually ends up fleeing into the Philistine area and pretends to be crazy so that he doesn't get killed. Let me find, because this is the funnest part of this, the way the Bible describes it. So this is chapter 21, verse 12. And David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands and made marks on the doors of the gate and let spittle run down his beard. And Achish said to his servants, behold, you see this man is mad. Why have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in the presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? So he pretends to be crazy to escape getting killed by the Philistines. So he escapes to a cave. His brothers in his father's house hear about it, and a group of soldiers come to him, and he ends up having kind of a force there. Now, we get to see how far Saul has fallen, starting in verse 6. When Saul finds out that David's run, he's been discovered, who's with him, he goes to the high priest at the tabernacle. and slaughters all the priests. Or he tells a guy by the name of Doeg to do it. So it's awful. Then we see David's heroics in chapter 23. He saves the city of Keilah. We see Saul pursue. We come to a point. Chapter 24 starts this. We come to two stories where David saves Saul's life. Okay, the first time he sneaks in, Saul's sleeping in a cave. David sneaks in, is undetected. Saul has gotten up and gone over to go to the bathroom. David sneaks in and cuts a corner of his robe off, which, by the way, here's the symbolism of that. If I can cut the corner of your robe off, I could have cut anything I want. The funny thing is, David feels guilty for cutting the corner of his robe off. He goes, I raised my hand against the king, against the Lord's anointed. I shouldn't have done that. So he calls out to Saul and tells him what's happened, and that, I didn't put my hand out against you. And Saul kind of, oh, well, then we'll be good. It doesn't last long. We have the death of Samuel. Then in chapter 25, we see kind of a weird story. A guy mistreats David. David has been protecting his livestock and his farm and all of that from bandits. And he asks for something from the guy, and the guy turns him out. And his wife hears about it and then goes to David and works it out where David doesn't come in and kill everybody at the deal. Then she comes back, and he goes, "Where'd you go?" I said, "Well, I went to go keep David from coming in and killing all of you." Well, when he hears it, he falls over dead. And then David comes in a few days later and takes her as his wife. This is wife number 2 of like 8 or 9 by the time it's all said and done. So we have this kind of story here. We see in chapter 26, we see David spare Saul's life again. This time he steals some stuff out of the cave where Saul is sleeping. So David ends up, Saul ends up in a cave again, and this time they come in and they find him sleeping, and they're like, "Kill him now." "No, I'm not going to do it." So he goes on. And this seems to be a moment where Saul and David make peace, but we know that's not really what happens, because David just goes ahead and runs away again. This time he goes to live with the Philistines, which leads to some interesting details. David lives with the Philistines for a while. Then in chapter 28, we see another pretty rank sin of Saul. He goes and finds a fortune teller, actually a medium, somebody who calls up the spirits of the dead is the term there, and has her call up Samuel. By the way, the Bible says Samuel shows up. And Samuel goes, "Why'd you call me?" And he goes, "Well, you'll be with me tomorrow." Basically, Samuel's message. "I'll see you tomorrow." So, I mean, that is literally how this works. "Oh, you'll join me tomorrow." Okay. So he's going to meet the Philistines in battle. David is going to go to this battle. And it is absolutely clear what is going to happen. David is going to go in. He's going to wait for the battle to get a little bit hot and heavy. Then he's going to turn on the Philistines and help Saul win the day. God steps in, and he makes the other Philistines commanders go, "No, we don't want him with us because he'll turn on us at the most opportune moment." So David ends up not going. And then we have a bunch of stuff. Another group of raiders come and kidnap his family and kidnap all the women and children in their hometown they were living in. So they have to go out and save them, which keeps them out of the battle. So the Philistines come. The Israel loses terribly. Saul's son dies. Jonathan dies. And then Saul commits suicide, ending the reign of Saul. Okay. And that's where 1 Samuel ends. We have this moment where Saul dies. Okay. And they talk about the fact that after the Philistines find his body, they strip him. They find his Saul and his 3 sons. They cut his beard off. They strip his armor, and they carry his body around to shame it. But a group from Benjamin go in and pull him off the wall and take him home and bury him. Okay, take him home and give him a proper burial. And that's the end of 1 Samuel. So the important thing here is understanding that the entire 1 Samuel discussion is about contrast. It is contrasting the king of Saul and the character of Saul against the character of David. Okay? But it is also a picture of who Samuel is. Samuel is a priest, he is a prophet, and he is the kingmaker. That is a very important thing. The first 2 kings of Israel are both anointed by one man. Okay? He is the one who is God's chosen person to anoint kings at the beginning of the kingship of Israel, of the monarchy in Israel.
He was a judge also?
He was a judge. But he would have been, and this is kind of the interesting part of this, most of the judges were very regional, but it appears that Samuel was a judge over all of Israel. Okay. And so because of that, there's importance. In a way, this sounds a little weird, but if you ever look at the early U.S. history, after the Revolution, when the Continental Congress was beginning to work on we were broke, the army hadn't been paid, and all this sort of stuff. And there was a big movement among the military to make George Washington king. There was a big movement to make him a king because he had won the war and all of that. And the story goes that he walks up in front of his army and reaches in, and nobody knew, but reaches in and pulls out a pair of glasses that nobody knew he needed to read. And he gives this speech where he says, no, you don't want that. And basically saves the U.S. from moving into a monarchy system because he rejected the option to do that. And in a way, you see that in Samuel because Samuel is the ruler over all of Israel. But he never wanted that kind of authority. He allowed God to be king over them. And so we come to this moment where Israel rejects. Now, here's the funny part. What we see going forward is we see all the warnings that Samuel gives the people, we see them all come true. We see them come true with Saul. We see them come through with David. We see them come through even more with Solomon. And so as we look at this, the very thing that God told them would happen, he said, look, they're gonna weigh you down with taxes. They're going to take the best of your fields. They're going to take your sons to carry their stuff and to do all this. They're going to do all these things. And all of that happened. And there does come a point where the children of Israel are like, we really don't like this that we're doing. And it comes back to, and this is something you guys have heard me say before, sometimes the worst punishment God can give you is to give you what you asked for. Because we tend to ask for dumb things. And so it is very important that we understand that when we look at this part of the history, we see a contrast in several places of a king like all the other nations have. And remember, that is the primary dynamic of Saul. He's a king like all the other nations have. He's tall, he's good looking, he's strong, he's all of these things, but yet morally and ethically and personally, he's a wreck. And we see over and over again people in his life make him look foolish, starting with his own son. That chapter 14, when you look at Jonathan, Jonathan was a godly man. And yet, his death at the end of 1 Samuel is in direct response to Saul's sin. Now, and remember, it colors everything in David's life that his best friend died. It's important. But when we look at Jonathan and when we look at David, we see very, very godly men. Now, David do well all the way to the end? No. But we see these two godly men who become bound together in friendship, while bad because of disobedience, because of ungodliness, because of unrighteousness, because of all those things, become a stark raving madman. Because God rejected him. And that's really the picture. A king like all the other nations had versus a man who's God's man. Now, I do want to be fair because we misuse this sometimes. It says, a man after my own heart. I would tell you, I don't think that's nearly as much about David's heart as it is about God's heart. So we often think, well, he was a man who had a heart like God. And there's some truth to that he had a heart for God. But really, he's a man after my heart. He's my man, is what God is saying.
But aren't we all?
Well,
He loves us all the same.
yeah. But there is something about, so understand, okay? So let me go back to this idea. Saul was the people's choice. David was God's choice. So what's the difference? When we choose, we mess it up. When God chooses. Now, it does say something about David's heart. I don't want to miss that. Because when we get to 2 Samuel, when we get to chapter 11 of 2 Samuel, we see the absolute worst of the worst moment in David's life. Well, what makes him still a man after God's heart, which is he is after that, is that he's willing to repent, he's willing to turn, he's willing to let God punish him. Whereas what did Saul do? He made excuses and pretended like he got mad at God for doing what he did.
God back.
Exactly. Understand though, and this is something we need to get into, and we'll get into it more in 2 Samuel. Why, if David is such a man after God's own heart, does the Bible make sure to mention this horrendous error in David's life? Right. So here it really comes. He's still not Jesus.
None of us are still human.
Right. So even the guy who is God's man still can't meet the standard. Even God's guy can't meet the standard. So it once again contrasts, because there is one who did meet the standard. His son, his descendant, this king in the line of David, does meet the standard that even David couldn't meet. And remember, when we go through and we look at the rest of the Kings and Chronicles and all of that, kings that are righteous are always pointed back to David. Kings that are unrighteous are always pointed back to their fathers. David is always the standard for what a good king was to be. Jesus is the one who surpasses even him. And that really is the point. That Jesus is the perfect king. Jesus is the true one with the God's heart. And so that is really a big part of the Old Testament, is contrasting all of and Jesus. All of us and Jesus. No comparison. All right, we will stop right there.
I have a question.
Yes.
No, I've always had questions.
No, that's fine. I don't mind.
You know, when David went and took the bread of the tabernacle or the sacred bread, why was that not treated the same as when they opened the ark, or they moved it wrong, or they brought the wrong fire, or you know what I mean?
So here is the thing, and this is not really a good answer because there's not one.
He broke God's command
What?
when he ate that bread.
So, but it was given to him by the priest.
And why was the priest not?
That you're asking questions that we don't completely understand. What Jesus gets into, and I don't remember exactly where it is. Let me find it, and I will get back with you.
The intent of how you would use it, or what you use it for, or
Right.
your motive.
So I think that there is a part of that. Okay, because remember that later we have this moment where David decides to move the ark wrong, and a guy touches it and he dies. So why that was treated as okay, we don't completely understand.
And Saul offered the sacrifice that he wasn't supposed to do.
Right. What appears to be the case is that God allowed it at that moment because David was in need. And understand that there is some very interesting dynamics within David's life where sometimes he acts more like a priest than a king.
Yeah, because he asked for I never can say the two words for what the priest used for
Right.
God to him, and he prayed to God, and what I read sounded like he was doing it. Not the priest was there, but he was.
So he probably was praying his part. I don't think I don't believe he used the Urim and the Thummim.
Yeah, that was.
The Urim and the Thummim, I think, is how it's actually pronounced. But the truth of the matter is, David is anointed by God for a purpose. And for whatever reason, at that point, God allowed the priest to give him that bread so that he could escape. It really comes down in the long run to what God tells Moses. I will have favor on those I have favor. And so we don't completely understand. Like I said, let me find it. I can't remember exactly where it is, but there is a spot in the New Testament where that very story is brought up. And let me find exactly what is said there, and that will help a little. I just can't remember. I just can't remember off the top of my head where it is. But so next time, remind me of the question, and I'll spend the week looking. Well, I understand that. All right. Have a good night.